Good afternoon, everyone. I trust that you're well. Thank you for joining us in today's session. My name is Lucy Machocho. I'm a pharmacist by training, and I'll be a moderator for today. So I'm seeing that we have very few participants as of now, and I'm kindly requesting that we give the rest about 2 minutes to join, then we can start the session. Hello once again to the new participants. Karibuni sana. So we'll just get started. The rest will find us on the way. And how the program will look like today is we'll first start with an introduction of what APN does, and then get to the session on our regulatory affairs course, so providing more information on the course itself, and then we can have a Q&A where you, the participants, will get the chance to ask questions regarding the course and also the organization if you have any to ask. And with that, I will give this to my colleague, Dr. David. David, karibu.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you. So I'll be taking you through the course overview and also just a brief introduction of what African Pharmaceutical Network. And we're hoping as we go through this, we'll be in a better position to understand what we do, understand what the course looks like, what are the provisions behind it, and ultimately then make an informed decision as you're deciding to pursue the course with us at the end of the day. So I'll be bringing up my screen. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Great. So basically, I'll start from where we are, African Pharmaceutical Network. So African Pharmaceutical Network is an organization that was established in 2020 on the backdrop of COVID-19. And at that particular moment in time, the concerns that we were having is that everybody saw how much Africa was going to be impacted by the pandemic. But the question is that most of the pharmaceutical professionals, stakeholders, and industry players were not part of the change. They were not part of the engagement in terms of how the response was going to be. And therefore, as African Pharmaceutical Network, as a group of colleagues, we realized that for us to ensure that the pharmaceutical stakeholders, professionals were going to lead charge and do something about it, there was need for a common platform that could bring people together. And that is now how we established the network for whatever it is, African Pharmaceutical Network. So the main principles and the priority was one, to facilitate a platform where we could engage, to share knowledge, to support individuals' professional development aspirations, which is the knowledge sharing component, then to shape policies so that we have a responsive market for pharmaceutical products and technologies within the continent, and finally, to facilitate innovative partnerships within the continent, because all the innovations, all the development that we are talking about, that we aspire for, cannot happen unless the pharmaceutical industry is leading the charge on them, unless the business ecosystem is supportive. Most development and most progress in terms of human socioeconomic development has been mostly driven by businesses, and therefore we need to ensure that we have a robust sector with a robust business ecosystem in it. And that is a critical piece for the work that we are looking at and how we are keen on doing it. Guided by that, the question somebody would be asking in why at this particular moment and what are the reasons as to why we needed to come into place. We understand that there's limited local pharmaceutical manufacturing capacity in Africa, and this has been a conversation from the year 2009 all through to the current day when people are still talking about pharmaceutical manufacturing in Africa, and there's already even a business plan. But there's need to drive the conversation forward. How will it come to be? It will come to be only on condition that we are clear on what specific priorities we need to shape for the continent. And if we are clear that manufacturing does not start from nowhere, it starts from having the right competent professionals, the right understanding of the market needs of our continent, but also the right resources and incentives for the business community to invest in the local industry. If I'm producing products and nobody is buying them, there's no need for me to manufacture them in that market. And therefore, those are the imperative for it. But luckily, currently, there's still limited local manufacturing, and we needed to shape the conversation on why we needed it, how we need it to happen, and then agree on the way forward. There's also segregated continental pharma industry. And when I look at the segregation, is that the clinical research domain working in their silo, we have the people who are working in supply chain, regulatory space, everybody's working in their silos. The question is, the person who is manufacturing can only manufacture for a disease that is available and for a demand that exists. For the people who are innovating can only innovate for a disease that has been established. Currently, we're talking about mpox globally. But for the monkeypox vaccine that is talked about as being developed and almost coming into availability, it can only be developed when we know the diseases that are suffering from the continent. The only way we will know that is when we have an interconnected web where information flows freely and people have access to the resources and information that they need. And that is where that segregation was a pain point. And the last bit is there was no common platform that could drive this. There were different platforms, whether from a non-profit, for the private industry association, for the regulatory agencies in their platforms, but everybody's talking in their space. Let us bring them together and have that conversation. What do we hope to achieve at the end of this? We hope to have a continental knowledge. We foster continental knowledge sharing where people can get access to the resources and knowledge that they need to make informed decision, but they're also competent to deliver in their responsibilities as professionals, and that is the aspiration. To promote best practices and stimulate innovative models of service delivery so that we're sharing improvements and new technologies and new advances that we're practicing in our own domains and practices. To champion for responsive market-driven policies and regulatory frameworks, and finally to stimulate investment in the African pharmaceutical industry. If those four are achieved, then we would have achieved our aspirations as an organization. What are the priorities that we have? Linked to the same aims, linked to our focus areas, workforce development. And this is going to be talking to the respective courses that we are offering as African Pharmaceutical Network. And that is one, the regulatory affairs, pharmacovigilance and patient safety, and also pharmaceutical supply chain management. Today, we're talking about the regulatory affairs within the pharmaceutical development, workforce development. Then we have the business ecosystem support. How do we support businesses? Help them access intelligence about the local market, help them gain an understanding and a foothold in the continent where they hope to practice. And therefore, we're able to work with them and even where possible, facilitate access to talent that they need to be able to venture into our markets. Those are the priorities that we're looking at within the business ecosystem support. And finally, policy shaping. can we shape policies? Can we argue for different changes in terms of our regulatory legal frameworks in the continent for whatever it is, so that ultimately the policies are supporting the business, but they're not putting patients at risk. And that balance is important. That is where we play in ensuring that we have the right workforce, the right business ecosystem, but also the right policies that support innovation, but safeguard public health interests and the patients who are counting on us to do that. For the regulatory affairs training program that we'll be talking about, this is our faculty. We have Dr. Denish Maisiba, Dr. Teresa Nyongesa, myself, and Dr. Christopher Odero. And these are the people who cover the different segments and the different modules that we'll be talking about when we look to the specifics of the regulatory affairs course that we offer as African Pharmaceutical Network. So with that, I don't know if anybody has a question around African Pharmaceutical Network before I go to the next bit around the course modules for whatever it is.
Please feel free to also use the chat box and pose your questions there. Alternatively, you're also able to mute your microphones and ask.
I assume the silence means we are all okay. So I'll move back to my screen. Then we go to the information session just to share an overview about the regulatory affairs training program for whatever it is. I hope you can see my screen. Lucy, confirm?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic, thank you. So when you look at the regulatory affairs training program that we are offering, the question that starts is, why regulatory affairs training? Why do we need regulatory affairs? So regulatory affairs as a profession was developed from the desire of governments to protect public health interests. And we all know that in all the countries where we operate, health and basically social services is a mandate of the government. But when governments do this, their obligation and their mandate is to ensure that the public are not affected negatively. Either they're getting quality products or whatever it is, they must be of the right quality. And the government has the responsibility of overseeing every activity, every product that is coming to the market meet the standards that are stipulated. And therefore, that was the essence of regulatory affairs. Governments having control of what products and services are made accessible to the public and the patients, in this case for pharmaceuticals and healthcare products. But on the other end, companies also had to ascertain and to assure the government that whatever we are bringing to the market meets what you expect of us. And if they do meet them, then we would be permitted to practice in this market and to bring our products into the market. And therefore, they had to offer that guarantee. So that is one of their key pieces. But even beyond that, for a company, if people have confidence in you, then you have better sales, you're better performing as an organization. And therefore, regulatory affairs then comes in as a value addition, as a mark of quality. We are compliant to the regulatory requirements, and therefore we are a company that can be trusted. And therefore, when you look at those two, you realize that regulatory affairs is the gateway to markets. Before a product is registered, it will never be allowed to be traded into any country. While on the other hand, for regulatory agencies to guarantee that a product comes in, they have to ensure that you meet the stipulated requirement. So for companies, it is the key that you need to use to access the markets. For regulatory authorities, it's the bottleneck or the barrier that you put in place that unless somebody fulfills the requirements, they'll never get access into a market. And those are the key pieces of what regulatory affairs looks like. So when you look at where we have been and where regulatory affairs has been, these are the four hexagons that I've talked about. There's the clinical research phase, where all the products that we're using have gone through clinical research and development. And in the clinical research and development, there's already, and I believe most of us have an idea of the good clinical practices, which means that the study must be conducted in an ethical way. There are certain principles that must be met that is in line with the Helsinki Declaration. And after the clinical research is done in a particular way, the documentation has to be reviewed and approved by regulatory authorities and ethics review committees and ethics review boards. Once the outcome of that clinical study is convincing and assuring that the quality of the product, whatever it is, will meet what is expected of it to come to the market, then the product clinical studies will be concluded. Then the clinical research, now product move to new product application, which is the point where it is being registered in the country and in the market of interest. We're at the point of new product application, and that is the core of regulatory affairs that most of us are accustomed to, and most of us are practicing within, is that you get a dossier, you review it, ensure that you meet all the regulatory requirements, submit it for approval and registration. But the end of regulatory affairs does not stop there, because across the life cycle, there will be post-market surveillance, pharmacovigilance information that is rising, new risks and new dynamics, and even changing the use of a product from one therapeutic area to another, additional line extensions, whatever it is. So then from new product application, we will have life cycle maintenance, which is now where you do variations, all the changes that you'd be dealing with in a product, those would come into place there. After the lifecycle maintenance, we have post-market surveillance and studies, and that is the PVPs. A product is in the market and it's causing harm to the public. Those are some of the key considerations that we still need to look at and see whether what controls are there, who does the reporting, and what is the expectation when a report comes from the regulatory authority to you as a regulatory affairs professional. So these have been the conventional regulatory affairs that we've been accustomed to: clinical research, new product application, life cycle maintenance, and post-market surveillance and studies. In the African landscape, to a greater extent, we've been operating between new product application and life cycle maintenance. Reason being, clinical research has still been very nascent and actually even underdeveloped. Globally, less than 1% of clinical studies happen in Africa, which is still a gap, and this is an opportunity for improvement. Then when you look at the post-market surveillance and studies, pharmacovigilance is a novel concept still in our regions, and it's something that people are picking up on. Gaining traction, but not where it needs to be. And the essence of this is, you look at, for example, the number of adverse event reports that are being made in our region, they are very minimal. And therefore, then even for periodic safety updates report or pharmacovigilance reporting that is being done, the quality of the data for our region and for our market is not as advanced. We have healthcare information management systems that actually do not track some of these post-market surveillance or adverse events related concerns, and therefore they will never be analyzed, assessed, and reported in the way it should be. So those are still, they're conventional, but they're emerging areas where there's still room for growth for them to advance. For the new product application and lifecycle maintenance, there are improvements that are coming in those spaces, but now will be more on novel therapies, but conventional therapy will still exist because in Africa, over 40% of our conditions are still infectious diseases, actually more than 40%. So that still forms the basis of where we are going to operate. What are the new trends and new developments and people are getting to and acknowledge? We have regulatory intelligence, which is a domain where at least understanding what laws are there, what developments are happening in those laws, and how do we respond to them when they happen. That is an coming area. Then we have regulatory policy development. Rather than responding to policies, can we shape policies? Can we engage in policy making processes? That is another piece. And regulatory intelligence and policy are kind of convoluted and interrelated to a greater extent in our markets and globally as well. Then beyond that, we have the digital technologies. With more regulatory requirements coming into place and people adopting digital use of digital technologies, there's need for people to work within the digital technology space as regulatory affairs professionals. When we talk about medical device regulation in our course, we have digital technologies and digital technologies as a medical device, software as a medical device, and all those different dimensions. How do you interface with that? Then when we're talking about regulatory information management system, the portals that we're talking about where we make submissions, who designs them? As you as a regulatory affairs professional, how can you inform the development, the utilization, and the improvement of such systems? So those are new areas that are coming in, not fully maximized and optimized, but they are opening up space. And the essence of regulatory affairs is to make the right products be accessible to the patients who need them, where they need them. And on that account, then the key piece that you need to be clear about is that access is at the core of everything. And for access to happen, then the regulations, the policies that are informing our access will be coming into place. And you look at it from the health technologies assessment, health economics, and outcome research. How do those get into policies that will set the priority for regulation being improved on or being drilled on? And those are key pieces we need to be clear about. So this is the new frontier of what we're looking at in regulatory affairs. This is where we have been, and we have to merge the two pillars of it and see how do we move forward as professionals. And these are some of the key reasons as to why our regulatory affairs come in the sense that we understand that we're in a market where regulatory affairs, the training around the specifics, the basic principles, the understanding, and actually the practical aspects of trade or regulatory affairs work has not been imparted into most of us as we're graduating out of our programs. And therefore, we need this skill set. And that is where now we're coming in to see these are the skill sets we need. This is how it's applicable in the different domains, and then challenging each other that we're able to move that cog to the next frontier. So when you look at the specifics of our regulatory affairs course, we have, it's a 10 module program that is being delivered. And the 10 modules we have, the first one, just getting you to understand what regulatory affairs is. I've given a snippet of it on this conversation, but that is just the starting point. There's much more to be learned around what regulatory affairs is. Then beyond to get the introduction to regulatory affairs, we go to the business fundamentals of regulatory affairs. Why is that important? You're practicing, and most of us, if you are going to work in the regulatory affairs space, it is within the business side. It's a pharmaceutical company, wholesaler, local technical representative, distributor, whatever it is in a business. So what is the business value you bring in as a regulatory affairs professional in that system? If you can understand that, then you'll be in a better position to work. And the reason as why we have that module coming after introduction is you know regulatory affairs, then you know what your role to the organization is. Then once you know what your contribution to the business is, you can now go to the specific technical aspects. So when we go to the specific technical ones, we have the array in biopharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical products, usually medicines, both biological and the small molecules. We have the regulatory affairs in clinical trial management, doing clinical trial application submissions, following up ethical review submissions and related. Our regulatory affairs in medical devices and in vitro diagnostics. I've talked about the digital technologies and software as a medical device and all that. Those fall into that purview. Then we have regulatory affairs for borderline products, including cosmetics, herbal products, nutraceuticals, and we understand that these have not been regulated as much, but there's a growing interest in regulating them, especially with herbal products being so much in the African continent, but not regulated. Now they're getting into the mainstream regulated healthcare products and technologies. So we need to understand what that regulation looks like. Then we have quality assurance and compliance in regulatory affairs. If we are going to assure government that we are meeting these provisions, then how do we guarantee and what system do we put in place to give that assurance? That is another key piece that we're talking about. Then regulatory policy and intelligence, what are the fundamentals of it? What does it look like? How do you practice in that domain will be covered. Then we have emerging trends, and I believe most of us to a greater extent have heard about African Medicines Agency. What are the implications? What would happen if it comes into place, a common regulatory agency for Africa? What are these emerging trends, and how do we make use of them moving forward in our professional careers for whatever it is? So those are opportunities. Then we have career opportunities in regulatory affairs, which is a key, another piece, and that is basically giving you guidance on where we can operate and what we can look like in terms of that operation in the continent. So the career opportunities becomes the last module that we do cover in our courses here. So once you've done the modules for whatever they are, the additional information that I'll be keen to offer it to you here, we have a training schedule. We normally have classes every Wednesday from 7:30 p.m. East African time, covering 2 hours most of the time, to 1.5 hours to 2 hours maximum. Duration of 3 months, that is the period that the program is expected to cover. And the course structure is that we have the core lectures, which will be delivered by our faculty as you've seen. Then after the core lectures, we have guest lectures. This is where we, based on a need area from the students who are learning with us, we identify a speaker who will come in and offer the guest lecture. And this is basically to give us bridge the gap between industry practice and the training component. So you get to listen to experts who are talking about the emerging trends, emerging conversations, and key issues of interest to the learners and also to the industry at large. Then we have case studies where you're given a case example of what really happens in a regulatory environment. Then you're able to solve for it through the thinking through process, coming up with suggestions or interventions that you'd implement as a regulatory affairs professional. Then finally, we have the networking regulatory affairs dinner, where we get to convene, we get to meet one another, and just finalize our engagement for the 3 months. And the essence of it is you put a face to the name that you'll have engaged with through the classes. And it also gives you the access to the people who are practicing, because for the dinners, we do not limit them to the people who are just part of the cohort only. It comes in with part of the cohort, but also people who are in the industry who are practicing. And therefore, you're already building your networks to network and build relationships. The other bit is that the investment, what would be expected of you? Our courses are offered at a fee of $250 per member for members and for $300 for non-members. And this is basically to ensure the sustainability aspect of our programs so that we're able to pay the faculty. We're also able to run the office and have the secretariat who supports in coordinating our activities maintained in our office for whatever the work that we are doing in this space. Then the last bit in terms of certification, yes, we do have certification, and at the end of the course, you'll be issued certificates. And the accreditation that we have are with the Pharmacy and Poisons Board for continuous professional development program, and also we have a seal of provision by the International Pharmaceutical Federation. And that brings me to the end of my presentation for this session. So I will bring it back to you, Lucy, for Q&A.
Thank you, David. I believe now we have a good understanding of what we do as EPN and also what our course entails. And I can see we have some questions already in the chat. I am also encouraging the rest of the participants to continue sending the questions. You can be able to unmute and ask it. But as of now, we can take Dr. Ochieng's question. So in terms of policy, do you lobby in terms of policy, do you lobby in terms of laws and regulations being passed?
So in terms of policy, in our lobby, it's not more lobbying but advocacy, because then we engage from a point of this is a law that's coming in. How does it impact the pharmaceutical industry? How do we want to shape it, and what direction do we want it to go? So the first thing that we normally do is reviewing the policies that are being published or that are being fronted. Then once we do the review, we develop a position paper on it, which we then use in sensitization and engagement with industry colleagues and peers, but we also channel it to the respective policymakers where they are. And the aim of that is to ensure that at the end of the day, the policy that is coming out, it needs to be informed by what the practice looks like. And I would assure you that actually, for example, in Kenya at the moment, one of the key policies that we've engaged substantially is the Kenya Drug Authority Bill, which is now being renamed to the Kenya Health Products and Technologies Bill, the Parliament. And if it passes out, then we are hoping it will give Pharmacy and Poisons Board, or rather the national regulatory agency that will come after that, the muscle to be able to regulate products better, but not only to regulate specific products, but to have an overarching regulatory responsibility. And that would be a key piece. And also to open up to possibilities of what the future would look like. Currently, the Pharmacy and Poison Board does not have a research arm of it. But then how do we regulate research and innovations when we do not have a research component? And developed authorities have that capacity. So such kind of engagement. And there's still much more that we're hoping to do. And we're hoping we'll be able to grow into that. I hope that helps, Cyprian.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Dr. Ochieng. So I can see Faith is typing. Meanwhile, are there any other questions that you have? Please feel free. Thank you, Faith. Very insightful and eye-opening. Thank you for organizing this. In Kenya, industries and regulatory firms aside, where else is the market ripe for RA?
So in terms of the market being ripe for regulatory affairs, I think a growing area and a growing opportunities in the clinical research and clinical trials regulatory piece. And that is an opportunity that is opening up. And I would look at it, for example, when you look at the Kenya market, there's this conversation about bioequivalence studies. Bioequivalence means clinical research sites have to conduct the studies to establish that the product bioavailability is optimal for what is expected for the product. Do we have clinical research sites in Kenya? Yes, but not as many. Do they have the analyzers for bioequivalence studies? Some of them don't. Therefore, that opportunity is going to open up in the region and in the continent, because most of these are requirements that are coming up as a follow-up to the WHO GBT assessment. So globally, there's going to be a trend, and Africa specifically is going to gain that growth. When you look at where you can practice, especially with the developments, I can tell you that the East Africa medicines regulatory harmonization is going to open up spaces. And as much as it's opening up spaces, the reason for that is that this August, actually, I think it should be next week, there's a convening where they're coming up with the sustainability plan and they're hoping it will be adopted. If it is adopted, then ultimately now submission through the East Africa community will be through a platform and through an agency on its own account. They will need regulatory officers to support with those registration and at a regional level. Africa Medicines Agency is expected to be operationalized in November this year in Rwanda. So then that opportunities will be coming up in that market. So those are some of the areas where we have such opportunities coming in. The other piece around it is with development partners. With the highest burden of disease in Africa to a greater extent, over 25%, the global community have an interest. And that is from regulatory affairs beyond, and that is where I would say, when I presented that slide, beyond the dossier, beyond the product as it is, there's much more that can be done. And the essence of that is that these health organizations would be looking at regulations within the supply chain. We have substandard and falsified medicines. How do we regulate for these and contain such kind of pain points and challenges that we're having in the continent? So those are new areas that are coming in, and there would be areas of consideration for a regulatory affairs professional who is keen on practicing within that domain.
Thank you, David. Anyone else who has any questions? Before we wrap it up? Okay. I think if there are no further questions, we can call it an afternoon, or is it an evening? We can call it an evening. And I thank you all for joining. Thank you, David, for taking us through the session today. I wish you all a lovely evening.
Thank you so much, Lucy. I hope we get to connect with all of you again another time. Thank you and bye.